So let me start out with something super shocking. I'm going to say some shocking stuff today because we're talking about privilege, and it may come as a surprise to you, but I am a white man. The red beard does something. I just wanted to get that off my chest. It's funny, but it's true. I'm a white man. I am cisgender. I'm straight. I am Christian, which in North America means essentially that I've grown up with privilege. I've lived a life of privilege. So this is going to be a hard conversation, and it's very weird. You're probably already thinking it. If not, you should be, and you will now. It's very strange for a white, straight, cis male to be telling you about privilege. And here's one of the weird things is that because of that privilege, I can talk to you about it, and you don't put your guard up quite as fast because of all of those things, because we're also talking about me. So that's kind of a strange predicament that in some way it is helpful. Along the road, I'm really excited. Just to give you a heads up, I'm really excited. We've got some others that are going to come in, because it would be definitely weird if a white guy got up here for 8 weeks to tell you about privilege. So we've got some people coming in that are going to help give us some depth and some different perspectives on the topic and tying it into different aspects of faith in the Bible. And I'm really excited, in particular about a friend of mine with the PhD in racial reconciliation from a top American university that happens to be my alma mater. He's going to come up and do a special thing with us one week. And so I'm excited about some of those things that we have coming. Just to get that out of the way, I'm a white guy. But in all seriousness, I'd like to tell you some stories. And before we get too far down the road, I think it's a hot topic, especially if you're watching any U.S. news. Conversations of race and privilege are massive. And some of you are already working on your argument. Just let it settle. We live in BC. We are Canadian. This is not a conversation that we have to have because we love diversity and we love people from other countries and refugees, and we want to love everyone. We're in the Northwest. And I hear you, and I want to tell you, most of you, you're white, and it feels that way. But it's not the full picture of what's going on. I spoke a couple of weeks ago with a pastor. I can't remember where she's from. I think she's in New York, but somewhere on the East Coast anyway. And she is a minister in a very progressive denomination. She is in a very progressive or even liberal church in this larger denomination. So the left of the left, okay? And she has led her congregation through a year of talking about privilege. And one of the things that she said was, immediately, this is the left of the left, people that don't think this is a conversation that we need to be having. And immediately she had people say, I'm not sure why we're doing this. Like, we're all on board. You're preaching to the choir. We don't need to have this conversation. And I think in BC, we feel that way too. But we can look around. We can look at, and we will along the way, some statistics. We can look at our histories. We can look at the way people get treated differently and it's often systemic, it's often subtle, and we feel like everything is good, we love everyone, and it's just not always the case. So let's just start there. So I'm going to tell you a few stories. Now, admittedly, I grew up in Texas, and there is a much different conversation to be had there. And in the South, some of these stories come from outside of Texas, but still Southern. And so there's a different conversation to be had there. But I just want to identify some of these subtle ways that I never even understood until I started thinking back on my life and what privilege looked like. So I'll share a few of those. First of all, I grew up in almost an all-white neighborhood, in a white Christian school, almost exclusively, though not. I had some black friends, so I was able to, grow up saying, well, not me, I've got a black buddy right over here. Everything's fine. I grew up in a Christian school. I lived, although not wealthy, a low income single parent on one side, and then I would go spend the summers with my somewhat wealthy father, and so sort of this financially confused white kid, and experienced some things along the way. I was 16 years old, just gotten my driver's license. I got my permit when I was 15, drove around with my parent, blah, blah, blah. 16 years old, I go in, birthday, get my license. Everything's good. Go to Jackson, Mississippi, where my dad was living. And I've got Audio Adrenaline playing in this new pickup truck. It was beautiful. Anyone Audio Adrenaline? Come on. Thank you for that. And I'm pulling out onto a service road, which is leads onto the freeway. There's a car in the turn lane this way and turning here, and another car behind them that I don't see because I'm 16 years old and driving a new truck with Audio Adrenaline playing. And I pull out anyway into the lane, and she swerves, scrapes the long side of her car, pulls the bumper, just barely grabs my bumper, pulls the bumper away. Everything's drivable. Nobody's hurt. Both of us are like, I don't know what to do. What do we do? Who do we call? And I should add, the woman is African American. It's an older vehicle. I'm 16-year-old white boy in a brand new F-150. Man, it was pretty. Anyway, and we pull over to the side of the road. She's shaking, and I'm like, everything's going to be fine. I'm not feeling so great myself. I call the police. Everyone's fine. We just should have handed over paperwork, right? Everything's fine. I call the police and say, I've been a fender bender, and I can't even come up with the words to say what's supposed to be happening, and they're like, is everyone okay? I'm like, yeah, everything's fine. Okay, we're sending someone, but I gave them the wrong location on accident. So actually, we saw the police responding drive by, and no one shows up. Meantime, I call my dad, be like, hey, Dad. It's in an accident. It's like, is everything okay? He leaves work in his own nice vehicle and his business suit and shows up before the police because the police aren't coming. And goes to, talks to the woman, goes to an ATM, gets out enough money to give the woman for her to move on with life and us to move on with life. And it felt weird. It felt off. But I didn't think a whole lot about it until looking back on it and seeing the position of this woman and thinking from a position of race and what's going on in that scene. Privilege has a weird way of playing out in your life, and you never even see what's going on behind the scenes. I think about her from time to time. What was she experiencing? Was that enough money to pay for the damage on her car? Did that matter? What did she feel like she had options? Did she where all of those layers of things going on that are privilege in terms of both race, socioeconomic status, finances, the fear built in, and everything happening when this middle-aged businessman in a suit shows up to take care of his white kid that's just caused an accident. Privilege has these weird, strange fingers. A few years later, we were in Atlanta, Georgia. We were 23, 24 years old. I don't know, 25. Jenna and I were in pretty rough, we went through a rough patch, just on the whole. Not like marriage, like financial and living, working 2 jobs to go to school. And, I was going to school, working 1 job in the evenings, and then throwing papers from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. kinds of life, right? And she was doing similar kinds of stuff. And we missed the registration on our car. It's by a few days. It cuts off at your birthday there. And so the tag just shows the month, but it cuts off on your birthday. So the police that pulled us over actually ran the plate to find out that it had expired only a few days previously. We pull into the apartment complex that we were living, which is in an area that was often called Little Mexico. It was a fun place to be. And she's driving. The police is writing up a ticket for registration on the car. It's not tied to insurance. This is not an insurance thing. This is just the registration with the state. And I'm still white and very comfortable in myself and what's going on. And I say to the police officer, because he's starting to write up the ticket, I say to him, maybe I'm a bit agitated. But I say, it's only a couple of days. Is this really necessary, or something like that? Maybe not so calmly. I don't know. And he has me get out of the car and do this lecture, and his buddy or partner or whatever gets out of the car as well, and they come give me a lecture. Never did I have to concern myself with, is this actually going to cause me more harm? Are they going to find some reason to arrest me? Is my life in danger? I don't have to feel those things, because frankly, I'm still a white boy addressing police in Atlanta, Georgia. And every day, people of color have to be worried, am I going to get pulled over for a non-traffic related offense? Is my life in danger when that happens? How are they going to respond to me? And we've watched over the last several years, right? Unarmed people of color shot by police. They grow up with this. A friend of mine explained wealthy family, middle class, two parents, professionals, in a wealthy neighborhood, suburban kind of place outside of Atlanta, Georgia, explained to me his parents teaching him about interactions with police. They have to train their children to respond differently. That's never a conversation I had to have growing up. Privilege. I got a lecture. That was the end of it. We still got the ticket, of course, but that was the end of the story. I didn't have to think about that again. Privilege has a way of impacting our life in ways that we don't quite understand. I have lots of police interactions to talk about. But as that story moves on, I see, as I look back and identify those things, I see a life that always has this background of race tied to different events and different experiences. And I'll tell one more that sort of gets at what this looks like. Now, I've worked with organizations that do race reconciliation in New Orleans. I've worked in places of poverty. I've inserted myself into conversations and activism in places of oppression and diversity and everywhere that I can. At the end of the day, I get to walk away from any of that whenever I want. That's privilege. Last year we did a candlelight vigil for the Quebec City mosque attack. And I don't know, maybe 50 or 60 people came out to the bandstand in Maple Ridge, and it was bitter cold, and there's kids and families and half-lit candles or briefly lit candles and things. And I actually got the opportunity to lead that service. Again, I'm a white man in a conversation that has to do with privilege, this time religious and nationality, other types of privilege playing in. And two things that occurred to me that night. The first, a woman got upset when we didn't introduce a Muslim speaker early enough in the program. And she vocalized it. She said, "Excuse me, can we not have somebody?" And of course, it's on the plan is to have a diverse set of speakers, but the politicians all wanted a say and this and that, and can we not have somebody from the Muslim community say some words? And it was like, well, of course. Thankfully, I didn't answer that question because my friend Yusuf jumped in and he was like, yes, of course we do. That's coming. Why don't I go ahead now? And I was like, yes, please. But it was this moment where you go, this is something that people experience every day. And then at the end of that night, I had to stop at the grocery store. And it occurs to me walking through the grocery store that people live in fear every day and every step of their life. My friend Yusuf, who lives a very public life here in Maple Ridge, he's very active, has family calling him from all over the world saying, "Are you okay? It's time to bring your kids in closer to the family. It's time to not be so public." He lives every day in a different place than I do. And I'm walking through the grocery store at the end of that night going, here's this nice, beautiful candlelight vigil that was good and communal and wonderful, and I don't want to take anything away from it. But at the end of the day, I walk away from that and I walk through the grocery store like nothing's happened because I live a life of privilege. And I can walk out of a racial conversation at any point I want, and life will return to my normal, privileged self. So privilege is a conversation that is global. It is North American. It is BC. It is Canadian. It is a Canadian conversation that we need to have. I don't know what we're supposed to get out of this conversation. I've tried to come up with that. I've had a long time to get to a point where I say, okay, if we could only get this, then we'd be good. I don't know what that is. So I'm sorry in advance. We're going to talk about it. And I'm sorry in advance that I don't know where we're supposed to go with it. I think at a starting point, we begin to listen. We begin to hear. Jesus said, for those who have eyes, let them see. Who have ears, let them hear. And I think he's probably not talking about privilege directly. But the gospel story and the gospel narrative is a story about oppression. It is a story about marginalization. It is a story about poverty. It is a story about pulling people out of that and being part of the process of God pulling people out of that pain. And I think when he says, those who have eyes, let them see, it is, are you able and willing to see the dark places in our community, in our society? Are you able and willing to listen to the story of liberation, the story of hope, of coming out or pulling people out of that place? The man says, what do I have to do to get eternal life? He says, oh, well, follow these 5 commandments. And the man says, okay, well, I've done that. He says, oh, well, okay. Well, if you're really interested in this, go sell everything you have and give it to the poor. Go give up your life of privilege. Help pull somebody out of their place of marginalization, their place of oppression, and live your own life that way. He said, someone says, what's the greatest command? He says, love God and love your neighbor. And they say, well, who's my neighbor? And he says, oh, we've done this before, right? Oh, it's your enemy. It's the last person you would call a neighbor. It is everyone. Go live a life that treats all of us and lifts all of us out of that place of oppression. So I think through those things and I think about privilege and what we're supposed to get. If we can hear, if we can see, I think we get a better sense of what Jesus is doing and who these early Christians really are and what they're trying to do in this really societal upheaval of what's going on. I'm taking a lot of guidance in this series from a guy, John Dorhauer. He is the leader of a large church denomination in the States, and has spent a lot of time studying privilege and race and relations and different stuff. And he tells a story. He tells a story about early on in his PhD work on privilege. He is asked to write, what's the word he uses? A spiritual autobiography. And he begins trying to tell his faith journey. He's asked to write, we're missing a word there, a spiritual autobiography from a position of race. And so he begins to write his faith journey, trying to enter in people of color that he's known through his life. So I might tell mine with my black friend from the Christian white school. And it really upsets his professor. He's like, that's not what we're trying to do. Tell your spiritual autobiography. Tell the story of your spirit. Tell your life from a position of race. And he goes through this process as he's telling the story. He goes through this process of trying to figure out what it is that this means and how this looks. And he finally came to put one sentence in there that gave him the sort of the linchpin for how to move forward in telling this story. The sentence reads, "My father was a racist, and I hated my father." Now he begins to tell his story. Not that his father didn't have good qualities, not that that was the only characteristic of his father, but that allowed him to begin to see the stories of privilege in his life that even as someone studying it, he hadn't recognized before. He says, writing that line helped me to tell stories that needed to be told. Writing that line helped me know things about myself that had been repressed. Writing that line helped me discover new pathways to insight and healing that were heretofore inaccessible. Writing that line engaged me in telling my spiritual autobiography through the lens of race. Now, we started with that statement. We're in BC. We love diversity. We don't need this conversation. Here's what I want you to do this week. Actually, we started with, I am a white man. Here's what I want you to do this week. Turns out, race also includes white. It's not just people of color. It's not just like others. White also is a race. And so when we talk about racial issues, we talk about white racial issues. I sat in on a conference once, a group of about 10 white people sitting around the corner. In another room, a group of 15 people of color. And the question is, what makes you white? And we go, what is white culture? And we go, kid you not, apple pie came up in that conversation. And I was like, oh my goodness, that is not white. Anyway, this week, look through the lens of race. Now, this is new and awkward, probably, for most of you. for people of color, this is the norm. This is the only way. Many experience, cannot leave that. I, again, walk into the grocery store, leave this conversation whenever I want. You, most of you, walk off, leave this whenever you want. Think about how your life is impacted by race. And every experience, or many experiences, think about how is this experience changed because I'm white? Or your race, insert race here. And think about how does this experience change if I'm not white? Or insert race here. What does this world look like? When we have eyes to see, things will begin to change, and we will have new understandings in our community, our culture, our world. And whatever we get out of this, if it's nothing more than understanding the world through the lens of someone else's experiences, it is at least that. And I think that is very powerful.